The young man tilted his head slightly, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with her rising irritation. "Yes, ma'am," he said, holding out his boarding pass again, the airline's logo and first class clearly visible. The woman scoffed, her voice growing louder as her frustration mounted. "Are you sure this isn't some mistake? First class isn't exactly a place for everyone." A few passengers nearby started to turn their heads, sensing the brewing tension. The young man, unbothered by the growing attention, adjusted his red hat slightly and smiled politely. "I'm pretty sure the airline knows what they're doing," he said, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, I just find it hard to believe that someone like you could afford—" "Ma'am," a firm voice interrupted. It was the gate agent, who had stepped out from behind the counter, clearly aware of the commotion. "Is there an issue here?" The woman straightened, attempting to regain her composure. "I was just trying to point out that this young man might be in the wrong line," she said, her tone now edging toward self-righteousness. The gate agent glanced at the young man and then at his boarding pass, which he held out again without hesitation. After a quick scan, the agent nodded. "He's in the right place. Please step aside, ma'am, so we can continue boarding." The woman's face flushed, but she hesitated, unwilling to back down entirely. "I just thought—" She trailed off, realizing the eyes of the crowd were on her. The young man stepped forward, his smile unwavering. "Thank you," he said to the gate agent before looking back at the woman. "You have a good day, ma'am." He walked calmly onto the jet bridge, leaving the woman standing there, her superiority now replaced with a mix of embarrassment and anger. The other passengers murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads, others smirking at the scene that had just unfolded. Gate 24 returned to its usual chaos, but for those who had witnessed the exchange, it was a moment they wouldn't soon forget. The gate agent's eyes hardened as she held up a hand to silence the woman. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "this is not your concern. If you continue causing a disturbance, I'll have to ask you to step away from the gate area." The woman blinked, momentarily thrown off by the stern reprimand. "But I was just—" The agent cut her off. "I've seen his boarding pass. He's in the correct line. If you have an issue with that, you can take it up with the airline later. But right now, I need you to step aside." The crowd was now fully invested, the air thick with tension. Some passengers whispered to one another, while others openly stared. The woman's cheeks flushed a deep red, her indignation quickly turning to embarrassment under the weight of the agent's no-nonsense tone and the judgmental eyes of the crowd. "Fine," she muttered, stepping to the side, her movements stiff with frustration. The young man gave the gate agent a grateful nod and handed over his boarding pass, which she scanned without hesitation. "Enjoy your flight," she said with a small smile. As he walked toward the jet bridge, he paused and turned slightly, looking back at the woman. His voice was calm but firm as he said, "You should judge people by their character, not their appearance, or their hat." A ripple of murmured agreement spread through the line, and the woman's lips pressed into a tight line, her gaze fixed on the floor. The young man disappeared down the jet bridge, leaving the gate area buzzing with an energy that lingered long after he had gone. For many of the passengers, it wasn't just a boarding process they'd remember. It was a quiet lesson in dignity and composure. The woman stared at him, her face a mix of embarrassment, anger, and something resembling shame. Her lips moved as if to say something, but no words came out. The crowd, which had been buzzing moments ago, was now silent, captivated by the quiet wisdom of someone so young. Barron nodded slightly, his composure unwavering. "I hope you have a good flight, ma'am," he said gently, his tone carrying no malice, only sincerity. He turned and walked onto the jet bridge, leaving the woman standing there, stunned and speechless. The gate agent cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Next, please," she called, her voice steady but tinged with a new level of respect for the young man who had just boarded. The crowd began to move again, but the energy had shifted. Passengers whispered to one another, not with the earlier tones of judgment, but with admiration for what they had just witnessed. The business-suited man who had muttered earlier shook his head, smirking. "Well, that kid handled that better than most adults would have." The young woman with the toddler smiled softly, rocking her child as she glanced at the now flustered woman still standing off to the side. Maybe she learned something today, she murmured to herself. As for the woman, she eventually moved to the back of the line, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Her polished demeanor was cracked, her confidence shaken, and her thoughts consumed by the words of a teenager who had faced her judgment with grace and integrity. By the time the plane took off, the incident at Gate 24 was the talk of the cabin, and for many it was a moment that would linger in their minds, a reminder that respect and kindness carry far more weight than judgment and indignation. The woman's mind replayed Barron's parting words like a loop she couldn't turn off. I hope you'll think twice before you make someone else feel small. The truth of it cut deeper than any raised voice or harsh retort could have. He hadn't met her cruelty with anger, hadn't sought to humiliate her in return. Instead, he had held up a mirror, and the reflection wasn't one she liked. She shifted uncomfortably, her arms crossing tightly over her chest as she moved closer to the back of the line. The clinking of heels on tile and the muffled conversations around her seemed distant, muted. The young mother who had spoken earlier glanced back at her briefly, her gaze no longer disapproving but thoughtful. Perhaps she could sense the internal battle waging within the woman, a silent war between pride and shame. When the line moved forward, the woman stepped up to the gate agent, her voice quiet now. I'm sorry about the commotion earlier. The agent gave her a curt nod, her eyes softening slightly. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is what we do next. The woman nodded, a lump forming in her throat. As she handed over her boarding pass and walked down the jet bridge, she couldn't shake the image of Barron's calm demeanor, the quiet strength he had shown. Seated in the economy cabin, far from the first-class section she had so fiercely defended, the woman stared out the window as the plane began to taxi. For the first time in a long while, she felt humbled, not by status, but by character. She resolved, in that moment, to do better, to judge less, to listen more. Barron Trump's words had been simple, but their impact would ripple through her long after the flight landed. The encounter at Gate 24 had become more than just a moment of tension. It had turned into a story that people couldn't stop talking about. The ripples of that brief exchange were already spreading beyond the terminal, through social media posts, whispered conversations, and quiet reflections. The young mother glanced at her phone, scrolling through a video someone had uploaded. It's already going viral, she murmured to the businessman beside her. The clip showed Barron's calm response, his measured words carrying through the terminal. The comments below the video ranged from admiration for his poise to critiques of the woman's behavior. Moments like this make you think, the businessman replied, leaning back in his chair, about how we treat each other and what it says about us. The woman at the back of the boarding line overheard snippets of these conversations, each word chipping away at the defenses she'd built around her pride. She felt exposed, not just to others, but to herself. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about how others perceived her status or appearance. She was thinking about what kind of person she had become, and whether she liked that person. Across the terminal, people were sharing their thoughts with strangers, their collective focus drawn to the simple yet profound lesson Barron had offered. Respect doesn't require agreement, and dignity is never diminished by kindness. As the plane took off, the story continued to unfold in conversations and online threads. And for those who witnessed it, Gate 24 would remain a reminder of how a single act of grace can leave an impression far deeper than any argument ever could. The flight landed in Dallas, and passengers disembarked, many still reflecting on the events at Gate 24. Some left inspired, others introspective, but all carried a piece of the moment with them, a reminder that even in the chaos of life, grace and humility can leave lasting impressions. For Barron, it was another chapter in a life filled with lessons learned early, to remain composed, to rise above judgment, and to treat others with respect no matter the circumstances. For the woman, it was a humbling turning point. She walked through the terminal with a renewed sense of self-awareness, quietly vowing to approach others with more understanding in the future. And for the rest who had witnessed it, Gate 24 became more than a place. It became a story, a testament to the power of calm dignity in the face of assumptions. Sometimes the most ordinary moments become extraordinary simply because they remind us of what truly matters: kindness, respect, and the courage to reflect on our own actions.